Good morning, everybody. Can y'all hear me okay? Is that not okay? How about that? That better? Okay. I'm usually on the other end of this thing back there. So I like it back there a whole lot better. So we're continuing the series that everybody's been doing different lessons on. So my lesson today is on patience. So when we were doing this, Jimmy had, us choosing lessons up here. And I stood there and looked at it and looked at it. Well, Michael Underwood strolls right up here, looks down, signs something, and turns to walk away. I said, well, how'd you pick so fast? He said, I looked down and figured out which one I probably needed to hear the most and picked that one. So, I took his advice and I picked patience. A couple of weeks ago when I was working on this, I was sitting at our dining room table working on it, and Miranda asked me what I was working on, and I told her. She said, well, what lesson do you have? And I told her. She stops and looks at me and says, are you sure you shouldn't swap with somebody else? Okay. So that preachers always tell you they start with themselves on a lesson. Yeah, this is definitely one that I'm starting with myself on. So we think about patience, and we look at all the characters in the Bible and all the examples that we have. How would we fare? In our life of modern conveniences, most of those conveniences are eliminating what? Having to wait. Trains, planes, and automobiles all travel faster than walking. Right? That's the whole point of having them. Fast food. And don't forget that cell phone. It's all about, you can call somebody anytime, text them, email them, look up information, whatever. It's all about doing it fast. So you don't have to wait. How many of y'all have mailed a letter recently, put it in the mail, and sat and waited for a response? It's about what I figured. You may mail a card, but not like a letter, handwritten letter to somebody. We don't do that anymore. We don't like sitting and waiting on stuff. So this is the text. The text is from James chapter 5, verses 7 through 12. So I'll be reading quite a bit today. It says, be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husband waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rains. Be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take my brethren the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and tender mercy. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath. But let your yea be yea, and your nay be nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. So where does patience come from? Well, it comes from life's experiences. Remember as a child how long it felt like to get to summer? It just felt like an eternity. Well, now, how quickly does it feel like time goes? It feels like it's there again, right? Things that we thought was a big deal having to wait on when you were younger, does that still seem the same? In James 1, verses 2, it says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into divers temptations, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. It's one of those things, this is not something that you've brought on yourself. In 1 Peter 2, 20, 21, for what glory is it when ye be buffeted for your faults? Ye shall take it patiently. But if, when we do well and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow his steps. Things aren't always going to go well. How do we deal with it? This talks about Christ being our example. He did everything right. We still know what happened. And that was the plan of God. how did that feel? When you go and do something right and it kind of blows up in your face, that doesn't feel real good. You try to do it right and things still don't go well. How do you respond to that? You have to learn some patience and going, well, I've done what I can do, and not react the wrong way. And this is one thing that we see, Chad talked about elders here recently, and that's one of the examples that we're given, one thing that's as a requirement. In Titus 2:2, said, the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in the faith, and charity, and patience. This is part of the reason that you don't see a young man meet those qualifications, because they ain't got the patience. This takes time. It takes living to learn to have some patience. And I knew I was going to forget to advance this thing. Okay. So a lot of this is dealing with, you've got to watch your attitude when it comes to your patience. Paul said in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We've got to keep that in mind when things don't go well, as we live our lives, when we're having to wait for something. We've got to watch our attitudes. James 1:19, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So one thing we're supposed to be swift about there, and that's to listen. The other two, how many times have we, with a lack of patience, opened our mouth and stuck our foot in it? That's kind of a common thing that man does. We look at Peter and we always get on to Peter for opening his mouth. Well, we all do the same thing. And as far as getting angry quickly about something, there are some things that you know what it is that drives you nuts. That one thing, it may be a person, it may be one of your children, spouse, somebody at work, whatever, that can just, in the blink of an eye, get under your skin. Well, this verse, bite that tongue. Because if you can bite that tongue for just a minute, you may save a lot of trouble. That back one's not working. I told him, it's not going to be a problem, but I didn't think about it. I can't see it. Yeah. Yeah. So the Christian life, this is an endurance thing. This is not a quick, everything's fine, everything's quick. This is a long run here. So back in James 1, picking it back at verse 3, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. That word perfect in here, a lot of that means mature and complete. You look at all the examples of failures that we see and around us in the Bible, everything that, it's this maturity that how to handle a situation. Sometimes that's not really easy. James 1:12-13, blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to them that love him. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. God cannot tempt with evil, neither tempteth he any man. So those temptations that come along, in the end, are you stronger than in the beginning? Well, maybe that was the point. How can we become stronger if there's never any effort put in? Paul refers to a lot of things as running a race. I know some folks in here do races and run and all. That hurts. If y'all see me running, the best advice I can give you is you better keep up because something's after me. Running is not fun to me. I've done some bike rides and all, but at some point when you're training for a ride or run, or you're doing it, and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, what am I doing this for? This doesn't feel good. But in the end, are you stronger than the beginning? And this is referred to a lot of times, this is not a sprint, this is a long distance run. I don't know how some of these people do these real long runs. I read something here recently, but there's some crazy run up in Tennessee. It's 5 20-mile runs through the mountains with no directions. I think 7 people have finished it in the past 25 years. There's just something wrong with those guys. But any type of exercise, it's not fun. We do this probably for our health, but it just don't feel good. It hurts. But then this is how Paul, they reference things to running. Sometimes it doesn't feel good, but we got to stick with it. In 1 Corinthians 9:24, it said, "Know ye not, they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that you may obtain." So in most races, there's that one fast person that wins. Well, this is a race that everybody can win. You just got to keep running. This run that we have, this life of a Christian, like Paul referred to this as, there is a goal at the end. There's a prize at the end. But you got to keep running. There's no way of obtaining the prize if you stop. Don't forget that. So we're going to break through some of these verses. So we'll start with verse 7. "Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it until he receive the early and the latter rains." Now, this is an example a lot of folks can understand because, especially in this time this was written, you had a lot of farmers. That's how they got their food, is by growing it. We're a little bit removed from that for the most part now. And in that area, you had a couple of rainy seasons coming through. If that didn't happen, nothing grew. Those had to happen for any kind of thing to grow. If you go plant something now, 60, 90 days roughly, when a lot of things are planted in your garden. How many of y'all planted a garden recently? Okay, you got fruit already? It's going to be a while, isn't it? So, it's one of those that, again, you can go to the store and go get whatever that produce is. But that's not always been the case. A lot of folks don't have gardens because they don't have the patience for it. And with that garden, it doesn't take a little bit of maintenance. You can't just plant it and walk away. It takes a little bit of care for that area to make that work. And you look at a garden, look at orchards or vineyards, planting fruit trees. It may be years before you see any fruit off one of those. Are we patient? That's you look at the way we live and how quickly we can do most things or get our hands on most things. How does our patience compare to folks that lived in that time? We have Caleb here. He's a farmer. He mainly has animals. How long does it take to get a bull or a cow ready to go to market? How many? 2 years. So he has to take care of that thing for 2 years, every day, to try to get to that goal of being able to sell that animal. And my daddy has some bees, and when he does those, I'm far, far away. But he works on those things all year. To maybe one day he might get a load of honey out of there. And then that's a lot of work, which is usually when he gets my kids up there to help him deal with all that honey. But you put all this work into something to reach a goal, but it's not going to be quick. In verse 10 it says, "Take my brethren the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience." So here's a few examples. Elijah had to flee Jezebel. He was discouraged, asking God to let him die. Jeremiah thrown into a dungeon, sold as a slave. Micaiah had to flee Ahab. The birds fed him. He was told to go live by the creek and let the birds feed him. John the Baptist, he lived kind of out away from the city, and he lost his head. How many other examples are there? As we can look, these are just a few of the sufferings of these men that, what did they do? They preached God's word to those around them, and they suffered for it. You read many times of how lonely they felt. At least one or two of them said, "I'm the only one left." But God would say, no, you're not, and encourage them to kind of stay the course. And there's others, in the Old Testament especially. Look at Noah. How long did he preach and build? Quite a long time. With his preaching, as far as had not a whole lot of fruit off of that. They had to be discouraging. Abraham and Sarah, they had a promise. But how old was Abraham when he finally had a child? He'd waited all that time. Look at Joseph. How long Joseph must have felt. Sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he gets thrown in jail. But years later, he ends up being ruler of Egypt and actually saved his own family. But how discouraged and all must he have been for so long? And you look at Moses and Joshua and Caleb. 40 years they wandered around in the wilderness. A lot of that wasn't their fault, especially Joshua and Caleb. They were the two spies that said, hey, we can take it. But still, they had to wander around the wilderness for 40 years. You look at Caleb's attitude when he finally got into the land. He was ready to go. He had been promised the mountain where the giants are. And when he got in there, he reminded Joshua, hey, this was the promise to me. I want to go do it now. Let's go. And he took the land that he was promised. And he talked to Joshua, he goes, I'm ready. 40 years ago, I was ready to go do this and strong and able to do it, and I am now. Let's go do this. But for 40 years, he had to wander around the wilderness waiting on that. Again, how patient are we in comparison to some of this? All right, verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. So Job feared God, and one day he lost all of his possessions, his children. And this, if you read that, the messengers came one after the other. He didn't have time to deal with, in his mind, all he had lost before another messenger came up. Hey, all this is gone. Hey, all this is gone. Hey, all your children are gone. The way it reads is one right after the other, all in one day. And at some point after that, well, now he's covered in boils. And what had he done wrong? In verse 1 of Job, in the King James and New King James, he's referred to as perfect. And we know he's not perfect like Christ, but this is that mature, upright man. But look at all he's suffering. If you read through and listen to his so-called friends that show up, trying to figure out what he's done wrong, and Job's answers to them, and even his wife is like, curse God and die. He was suffering all of this, and for what reason? What fault of his? Through all this, what did Job do? He stayed faithful. And the Lord took care of it. So if he was called perfect or complete in that verse 1 of chapter 1, what kind of man was he after that? He had to be that much stronger and that much better of a servant to God. So we're going to park right here for a minute. Verse 8, be ye also patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest any be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. In Matthew 18, someone asked Jesus, if my brother wrongs me and asks for forgiveness, how many times do I forgive him? Jesus said unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. We've got to be patient and stay the course, but we've also got to be patient with those around us, be that example and that light. And one of the quickest ways to really affect your influence on someone is to have no patience with them, or to react badly when things don't go well. In 1 Peter 2:2, it talks about, as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. You know, we have a young Christian or young person can we expect them to have the patience and have the judgment when it comes to everything they're going to deal with in life right off the bat? Did you? They've got some lessons to learn. They're going to learn their patience the same way we did, by living life and seeing how things go and trying to learn from it. In Mark 9:42, it says, "But whoever causes one of these little ones in me, who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better that a millstone were hung from his neck and they were thrown into the sea." So the expectation of the older are to teach the younger and to help them. So the way we react to them, especially when they mess up, what's this verse say? We're there to help build them up, not cause them to sin further, not push them away. Because then that condemnation comes on who? On the one that did that. We've got to build up those that are struggling, especially the young. If you look in Acts 18, there's an example of that. I've heard of Apollos. So this man was going about teaching. One problem was he must have been out of town when some things changed. And it says in verse 26, when Aquila and Priscilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. So Apollos was out there teaching, but what he was teaching was not complete. Now, how could they have reacted to him? When they could have condemned him, hey, you're not preaching what you should be. They realized that he didn't know all the information. So they took him aside and built him up. They showed a little bit of patience there to give him the benefit of the doubt to go and build him up. And look at all the things he accomplished because they took that time to do that. He was referred to in several places as a great teacher. In Ephesians 4:2, it says, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love. This is that doing it in love. We've got to make sure we watch our attitude again, that we're doing things the right way, for the right reasons, to build others up, to show that patience with them and guide them when they need it. In Luke 8, verse 15, this is about the sower. But that on the good ground are they, which in an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keep it, and bring forth fruit with patience. So, you talk about the sower. Well, that's a farmer. And those are the good ground. Now let's back up and talk about that farmer again. How quick does he get results? Now, how quick should we expect results when we teach somebody? Is it going to be just add water, instant Christian? Instant understanding? No. Some of this takes a little bit of time. It takes some patience. It takes some work. Many times we read stories in the New Testament, look in Acts 2, you see Peter preach, and then you see this result of all those that want to become Christians. Well, let's remember, if a lot of these were Jews, they had been taught the Old Testament their entire lives. They knew all the prophecies of the coming Messiah. They had a lot more knowledge of these things than most people we're dealing with. So that's why sometimes you see a quick result, because they have a lot of the background. They already knew a lot of this. Some of the times the people we're talking to don't. You're kind of starting from scratch. So you're not going to have that instant result. So in the Bible, there's several examples of folks that lacked patience or had a moment where they made a rash decision. And we mentioned Abraham and Sarah, no children. Abraham was 100 years old. Well, they got tired of waiting on God. So they had another son, and but that was not the son of promise. The children of Israel, there's so many examples with them. Over and over again, they got impatient. But when Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, he was up there 40 days. They figured he died. They gave up. So when he comes down, actually God tells him to come down, and what happened to the first copy of the 10 Commandments? He broke them because he was angry. Because they just completely forgot everything they ever knew, it sounds like, and built them a calf like what they worshipped in Egypt. They didn't trust and wait. But Moses himself, these were frustrating people. Lost his temper, struck the rock versus speaking to it like God told him to. Remember that swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath? Well, this time Moses, he just acted rashly. He didn't have the patience he needed. King Saul, he followed God's word, went into battle. Didn't follow all the instructions. And then waiting on Samuel to show up to offer sacrifice. Got tired of waiting. And it's like Samuel was on the way and showed up just a few minutes later. Couldn't you wait a little bit longer? And then Jonah at Nineveh. Much of the book of Jonah, first he ran. And then he gets there and he is mad that God does not destroy Nineveh. That God is patient with them and offers, to save them, that people. He's mad about it. Do any of these examples, were any of them pleasing to God? And how many more examples do we find, Old and New Testament, people, in our own lives of us losing our patience? And does that further what we're trying to do? No. In Hebrews 12:1, it says, "Wherefore, seeing we're compassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." Again, this is a reference to running. And does this sound like a short sprint to you? This sounds like this is quite a long run. We're read of all the biblical examples in their entire lifetime. Some of them are waiting. That's all they do. You look at the captivities. There's some folks who were in captivity their entire lives waiting, hoping that one day God would redeem his people back to their land. Some of them never saw it. Look at the apostles. They waited. They worked. Most of them died for it. Most of them did not live to a ripe old age. One did. But what kind of patience does that show? In Revelations 2:10, it says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you in prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." So with the run that we're all in, you don't make it out alive. That's just the way it goes. It's part of it. But that's not where the reward is. In 2 Timothy 4, verse 7 and 8, "I have fought the good fight, I've fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me in that day. And not to me only, but to all of them also that love his appearing. So this is Paul towards the end of his life. He knew he didn't have a whole lot longer. But he talks about, again, running the course. Looking back on what he had done and the life he had lived, he's talking to Timothy, this example that he had set for Timothy of how he should do, how he should keep running. We use Paul's example a lot of times. Paul did a lot of great things. Paul suffered a lot. Paul gave up a lot even becoming a Christian. He walked away from his whole life. And he suffered for it his entire life thereafter, in one way or the other. But did he even pay much attention to that? Was that his focus? Your focus has to be on the right things. And his focus was on the reward and helping many other people get there as he could. When we look at these people and we compare, do we have that kind of patience? That there's a lot of things around us, a lot of distractions. Paul had a lot of distractions. But where was his focus? Was everything easy? No. I think some of this, was he in prison when he wrote this? I'm not sure when he wrote Timothy. 2 Timothy, he may not have been in prison at this point. A couple of books was written while he's sitting in prison. But he stayed the course. Okay, y'all haven't talked at all. Any comments? It's in studying this, and as we read, I've been, Chad, challenged us to read through the Bible, so I actually figured out I can do that off my phone or riding around in my truck doing inspections and listening to Job and listen to all that man suffered in some of these, the conversations that he had. He lost his temper a couple of times with his friends. And sometimes I think we miss some of these things when we read it as book, chapter, verse. Sometimes we miss the story of it, of just letting it run and listening or reading. And to listen to him argue his case. Hey, I hadn't done anything wrong, but I'm still suffering. I don't know why. And for someone to say, you did something, he got frustrated with him. And then we read of, some of these other folks, listen about some of the prophets and the things they endured. Do we have anywhere remotely the amount of patience that these people did in trusting God? That it's all going to work out? With our lack of patience in our world, that's got to be hard. They didn't know what was going. They couldn't look up the latest news from wherever around them to know what's going on in the world. All they knew was what's around them. All they knew was what they could see, and things that were revealed to them by God and the works that's going on. All these folks that sat in captivity for many, many years, they had no idea what to do besides follow God. So I think I'm probably done a little early, but that's all the information that I have. Do we have any comments?
This is a topic that we need constant reminding. You're not stepping on my toes, you're stomping all over. I appreciate you doing this because patience is a virtue, but it's also a learned trait, and it sometimes takes a lifetime to achieve it. I don't know that you ever do, but it's an admirable quality for those who have obtained it.
Yeah, the whole thing about, it's not something that you obtain quickly. And look at your kids or grandkids, and this is something that, even a little bit, when a child realizes what's in a bottle and they see it, you cannot give that to them fast enough. Maybe because they know that there's a reward in that bottle, that it fills their stomach. And that's how long does it take to grow out of that? Even as an adult, when you're hungry and you see food, you smell it. Like when we have a fellowship meal over here, and you're sitting in here and you smell it, oh man, it seems like, it may seem like Chad's preaching forever that day. Because you're hungry. But that patience is a learned thing. And it comes back to something that comes back to self-control. And that's something else we struggle with. That we know it's there, but we've got to focus on what we need to be focused on. And when we're dealing with children and all, especially, that we can't expect them to have that patience, to know how to deal with situations they've never seen before. All we can do is reassure them, try to build them up, to help them through those things. All right, Mike's going to count now.
A few weeks ago, I was talking to one of our members here. We were talking about a similar subject. This member will remain unnamed, but he was put in charge of taking care of some of the bushes around the building. And the previous man that did this was Brother Buford. I don't know if any of y'all still remember Brother Spade. And he talked about how he would spend so much time trimming those by hand and put out his tarp around it, and he trimmed them all by hand. And this other brother that took over that work had a power trimmer, and it didn't take him long before all the bushes were gone. I don't know if it was patience, endurance, or what, but Robert could probably tell you about
it. That's something that, there's always this latest and greatest thing that comes out that's supposed to make everything better. Well, it might make things a little faster, but it also gets you in trouble faster. That new car may be faster, and you're going to get a ticket for it too. But, look at how many things, if you stop and look at your daily life, how many things that are, been done the last 50 years, what was the goal of that item? A lot of time just trying to save this elusive time, to not have to wait, to be able to do it faster. Is that better? If anything, it has lessened our ability to learn patience.
It's called dealing with life. Everybody has to deal with life. The prophets in the Old Testament, children of Israel had to deal with just life events and come through each and every one of us. And it's how we deal with those things in our life that will produce a good influence in those that are around us, or produce a bad influence. And patience is a difficult thing when you've got a mission and you want to accomplish, like trimming bushes. But the best thing I thought to do was cut them down. But in Buford's case, he would spend the time and he would mold. And I observed what he did week after week, his patience and his endurance to carry out the work that was before him. He had no problem doing. He did a wonderful job.
And Cameron stayed in here this morning to suffer through this with the rest of y'all. But if anybody understands, for me working on my patience, it's probably my wife and kids, especially poor Cameron, because we get to working on something and I just expect him to understand what I'm thinking. And he's gotten a lot better at it, actually. There's been a few times he just hands me something because he knows where I'm going with it. And I'll look at him and he's done this long enough, he knows. But it's when you have that goal in mind, you're focused on that. And it's like, okay, take a step back. When we rush into stuff, how well does that usually go? Usually I mess it up. But having that patience to step back and to think of how should I deal with that situation? Biting your tongue. What's that?
Judy can spend 24 hours getting a tool out of a well and have the patience of Job but no curtains.
We-
I learned that was a limit to his patience.
Yeah, we all have that thing. So it's curtains for Jimmy. Don't ask him to help do those. For me, it's painting. You do not want me to paint. Paint drives me crazy. So if there's any painting done, it's usually not my thing. You know, we all have things that just kind of get at us a little bit that we don't enjoy. How we deal with it, you know. Maybe you don't do curtains, or you don't paint. But we all have to be that example of those around us and figure out how to deal with things as they come. But to be that example, but especially the biggest thing for me I got out of this lesson was dealing with others, especially those that are young and learning. We cannot expect someone that's young, that's younger than us especially, that hasn't experienced a lot of things, to have the patience and understanding sometimes to know how to deal with things. It's our job to build them up and not tear them down. You know, when someone messes up and does something wrong, yeah, that needs to be corrected. But how our lack of patience can be our beam. They may have a moat to deal with, but that lack of patience can be our beam, and we can do more damage than good. So how we go about those things, that matters. So that we build them up to help them run their race and stay in that race to attain the goal. If we discourage them to the point they just stop trying, you know, damage is done. How are you going to ever get them back in there? So that's the biggest thing for us, is take a second before we react to do something. How can we improve things? And I tell my kids all the time, before you speak, think about whether what you're going to say is going to help or hurt. If it's not going to help, shut your mouth. And you know, how many times, you know, we all need to hear that at times. I know I do sometimes. So sometimes biting your tongue is the best thing in the world you can do, because if you react quickly, that can cause more problems than it does good. All right, thank you. I think we'll have a quick break here before the kids come in.